hooked on a feeling. I'm high on believing that you're in love with me. Lips as sweet as candy.
Okay, in this series of videos, we're going to take a look at building proformas. This is going to be our first crack at it. We'll kind of expand this over the course of the semester, add layers of complexity into it, do a little bit more with it over time. But in order to get started with kind of building this skill in Excel, we're going to start with a kind of a simple framework, a simple project, and that is just a single home. Actually, we're going to deal with a duplex here. So a unit that has two units side by side, and the assumptions for the proforma that we're going to start with are right here. So if you go to Canvas, go to the single family housing week 3, click on that link there, you'll get the Word document that outlines all of the assumptions that are necessary for the proforma that we're going to build in Excel. So this outlines everything, and that's what I'm going to do now in Excel. I'm going to capture all of this information, get into a spreadsheet, build out a 5-year proforma, and look and see what our returns are. So that's not written in here, but we're assuming a 5-year proforma, a 5-year hold. So let's see how we would build a proforma and what the returns would look like. All right, we're starting with a blank slate here, and the first thing we want to do is capture all of the assumptions, get a little area that has those assumptions, and let that kind of drive the proforma, drive the analysis. So in case any of these assumptions need to change at some point in the future, it's very easy to just change those in one place and it flows through the entire spreadsheet. So we're always going to have an assumptions section, and so I'm going to just start building that out now, and I'm going to kind of format as I finish. We're going to put the assumptions here. The first one is purchase price, and I'm not going to have you watch me type all this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and kind of fast forward through the typing of these items and the number that we're going to be using, and I'll format and then kind of comment on it here in a second. Okay, so at this point I have all of my inputs, all of my assumptions dialed in here, and I've indicated them with a yellow color. So somehow I'm kind of showing everybody that's going to look at this spreadsheet, here are the assumptions that are going to drive the analysis. If you want to change any of these are the places where you can change stuff. The other things in the spreadsheet, the other things I'm going to create now, really should not be adjusted. They shouldn't be messed with. Yeah, we want to have a spreadsheet that kind of flows from the assumptions. We don't want to have too much hard-coded stuff. That is where you're just typing in wholesale information. There's going to be some of that, but we really want spreadsheets to be computations and calculations driven by the assumptions. So let's start building out the framework here. The first thing I'm going to do is find a spot over here, and I'm going to put in the periods that we have. So we're going to, this framework is going to show up all the time in our spreadsheets, our proformas. We're going to have multi-period proformas, and so we need to have some indicator of the period that we're in. So we're going to start with time period 0, which is always the beginning of a project, of a proforma. And I'm going to move this over to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're going to have a 5-year proforma. And because I know that we're going to be using X IRR and X NPV, I'm going to go ahead and add a little indicator of the dates here. So this is a somewhat arbitrary thing, but I'm just going to pick some dates. And I'm going to do January 31st, 2020. And I'm just going to add a year to each one. And I guess from here, I'm going to just drag and drop. So I'm going to highlight these two cells, and I can extend this by grabbing this little thing at the bottom right, the handle, and pull it across, and I get all of my dates filled in there. If I want to expand all of the columns to fit, I can highlight them all and then double click on this side here. And so everything is fitting, and we've got our dates as kind of a starting point. So I'm going to start typing in some things. I'll kind of explain as I'm going along, and we're going to fix the formatting a little bit later on. So I'll try not to do too much formatting along the way. We can make it look prettier once we're all done. So the first thing here I'm going to put in is the purchase price. So that's going to be in time period 0. You know what? I'm going to go ahead extend this column just so I have room to type in the number. Actually, I'm not going to type it in. That's part of the whole hard coding thing. I don't want to type in 250,000. What I want to do is refer to the cell over here on the left that says purchase price. Now, because this is a cash flow and I know that I want my cash flows to kind of have a directional aspect to them, that is, negative cash flows are cash flows leaving me, positive cash flows are cash flows I'm receiving. I want to make this one a negative cash flow because I'm paying the purchase price. So I'm going to type in a negative and then refer to that cell. So negative B2, if I hit enter, you can see it shows up as a negative cash flow, and I'm paying it and everything is as it ought to be. The next thing I'm going to put in here is the sale, the eventual disposition of this property. So it's going to happen, and by the way, I'm having it on a different row. It just, again, helps things kind of flow a little bit easier, a little bit better. When people look and see what's going on, they don't see a number of purchase price here and then a future positive amount over here. It's very clearly indicated here that the sale is going to happen, and here's the row for the sale. Now my sale is happening at the end of year 5, and it's based on an appreciation rate. So there's an appreciation rate assumption over here, and I'm just going to use the FV function. So the appreciation rate is given right here, so I'm going to click on that. The number of periods is 5, and so instead of hard coding it, I'm going to go ahead and refer to that cell up there. There's no payments along the way, and the amount that we're starting with is over here. So if I close those parentheses, I get this number. And again, I'm going to go ahead and I'll do the formatting later. I don't like the pennies right now. Let me get rid of that. Later on, I'll make all of the dollar signs and everything else, all the formatting consistent across the spreadsheet. But anyway, this looks reasonable. We buy it for $250. It appreciates at 5% per year for 5 years, and it's turned into a bigger number. So that kind of passes the gut check test there. Well, let's keep moving here. The next thing that we have to deal with are all the cash flows from renting this property. So we've spelled out the assumptions over here to the left. So the first thing I'm going to do is do the rental income. And we'll start taking out some things. So the first thing we're going to do here is take out vacancy from the rental income. Now, vacancy is this important notion in real estate, and particularly in a pro forma, that captures the idea that your property and your units are not going to be forever and always filled with people paying their money on time. So you can have a few different things that affect that. One being that somebody moves out and there's a period called downtime where there's nobody in that space. And so vacancy captures the fact that this is not producing revenue for some period of time. There's another notion called economic vacancy, where you have perhaps somebody in the space, but they're not paying rent on the space. So it's in effect a vacant space. You're not collecting money on it. So we want to have that in our pro formas that captures this loss of income because things aren't quite going perfectly. So we're going to have a vacancy, and I'm going to call this a vacancy allowance because that's the language that we'll see later on in the semester as we talk about different property types. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the other expenses, and instead of typing these, I'm going to just go ahead and copy this. So I'm going to highlight this stuff, hit Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, and I have all of those expenses there. And right below here, I'm going to type in net operating income. So that's basically the bottom line for our cash flows. Let me do a little bit more formatting here. NOI is like the net income for a regular company. You know, the bottom line, the earnings for a company. So let's start filling some of this stuff in. We have rental income that's based on $1,450 a unit, so that's going to be this assumption over here. And because I have a duplex, I have two of these things. I'm going to multiply that times 2, and so I get my rental income for, oh dear, that's for a month, but this is an annual pro forma, and I'm already seeing other mistakes I'm making. Let me just make a quick side comment here. It is highly unusual that you will, right out of the gate, produce a completely flawless, perfect pro forma. There's going to be little tweaks that you need to make along the way. So as I'm doing this, you're kind of seeing how those tweaks have to happen. So I'm going to move this over to year 1 because we're not collecting any rents. We're not renting at time period 0. That's our initial cash flow, our initial purchase price. And with our pro forma, we're modeling it as if we get all of our cash flows at the end of the first year. So our rental income for the first year is 1,450 times 2, so that captures both units. But then we need to multiply that times 12 to capture the full year's worth of income. So if I multiply that assumption, the rental amount per unit times 2, and then times 12, I get a full year's worth of income. This next cell is the vacancy allowance, so I'm going to multiply the rental income times this vacancy allowance, the vacancy rate there, and you see I snuck in a negative sign. That's because this is kind of taking away from the income that you would otherwise have. So that is my vacancy allowance. Then my property taxes, I'm going to make all of my expenses be negatives as well. So I'm going to take the property tax and have a negative there. So our property taxes are $2,500 for the year. Our insurance is negative $1,600 for the year. Our HOA dues are negative $500, and the maintenance is $1,250. And so we have, in order to get the net operating income, I'm just going to take the sum of all these numbers, and I would have my kind of bottom line number. And in fact, to make it a bottom line, I'm going to stick in a line just to make it look like it's all coming to a total there. So if you look at this, there's all sorts of different formats with the numbers. Again, I'm not going to worry too much yet. I'll fix that towards the end. But I'm going to go ahead and pause this right now and stop this video before it gets too long, and we'll pick up with the second video and go on from here.
I can't stop this feeling deep inside of me. Girl, you just don't realize what you do to me. When you hold me in your arms so tight, you let me know everything's alright.